Bon Scott. Bon Scott spent his 6 days off recording drum tracks for a song he'd never sing. By February 1980, AC/DC's singer had dragged the band out of Australian pubs to the edge of American stardom. Highway to Hell had just cracked the U.S. Top 20, their first real foothold there. He was 33, 5 years into the job, and the Young Brothers told him to rest while they sketched the next record. He didn't rest. On February 15th, he sat down behind a drum kit, not even his instrument, and laid down parts for 2 songs on that next album just to stay useful. 3 nights later, he went out drinking in London with a friend, Alistair Kinnear, and kept going well past anything either of them planned. By the time Kinnear tried to get him home, Bon couldn't be woken. Kinnear left him in the back seat of a parked car to sleep it off, a blanket over him, and checked on him the next afternoon. He was still there. He never wrote a single lyric for the record he'd just helped build. AC/DC hired Brian Johnson within weeks and finished the album in 5 months. They called it Back in Black. It became the second best-selling album ever made. Bon Scott got there first. He just didn't get to stay for it. Ian Curtis. Ian Curtis had a plane ticket to America. He never got on it. By 1980, Joy Division had built a cult following in Manchester on the strength of one raw, brooding album and a live show that made critics uneasy. Curtis was 23, epileptic and unraveling, his marriage collapsing, his seizures worsening on stage, his second album nearly finished. The band called it Closer. On May 17th, his wife filed for divorce. That same night, he sat alone in his kitchen, put on a record, and wrote her a letter. The next morning, Joy Division was scheduled to fly out for their first American tour, the tour that was supposed to make them. Ian never boarded that flight. His bandmates found out hours before departure and canceled everything. 2 months later, Closer was released to the acclaim the band had been chasing. The album that was supposed to open a new chapter became the one that closed it. John Bonham. John Bonham drank 40 shots in 12 hours. He didn't make it to shot 41. By September 1980, Led Zeppelin's drummer had spent 12 years redefining what a rock rhythm section could sound like. Thunderous, precise, imitated by nearly every drummer who came after him. He was 32, and the band was 3 weeks from its first American tour since 1977. On September 24th, Bonham was picked up for rehearsal and asked to stop for breakfast first. He ordered 4 quadruple vodka screwdrivers before rehearsal even started. He kept drinking through the session. By midnight, at Jimmy Page's house, he passed out on a couch. Someone laid him on his side, the safe position, the one that's supposed to prevent exactly what happened next. He inhaled his own vomit in his sleep. His bandmates found him the following afternoon. Led Zeppelin didn't replace him. They didn't tour. They simply stopped being a band. Bonham had built a sound so specific that without him, there was nothing left to play. Randy Rhoads. Randy Rhoads told Ozzy Osbourne he'd kill himself one day. Rhoads was the one who didn't wake up. By 1982, the 25-year-old guitarist had done the impossible, turned Ozzy's solo career from a punchline into something critics took seriously, rewriting what a metal guitar solo was supposed to sound like across 2 albums in barely 18 months. The night before he died, Rhoads confronted Ozzy directly about the drinking, swallowing the tour, telling him flatly he was going to kill himself if nothing changed. The next morning, the tour bus stopped at a small Florida airstrip for repairs. While the crew waited, the bus driver talked his way into borrowing a parked plane. He had no real business flying and started buzzing the bus at low altitude, a prank meant to startle a sleeping bandmate awake. He landed once, then convinced Rhoads to come up for the second pass. Rhoads hated flying. He got in anyway, half joking, half humoring him. On the third low pass, the plane's wing caught the roof of the bus. It spun, hit a tree, then a house, and came apart on impact. Rhoads had warned somebody else the night before about dying too soon. Nobody got the chance to warn him back. Cliff Burton. Cliff Burton won a card game. The prize was a bunk that killed him. By 1986, Metallica's 24-year-old bassist had helped push thrash out of the underground, doing things with a bass guitar other players in the genre weren't even attempting. Master of Puppets, built partly around his playing, had just gone gold, a first for a band this heavy. Driving overnight between shows in Sweden, roads icing over in patches, Burton and guitarist Kirk Hammett drew cards for the better bunk toward the back of the bus. Burton drew the ace of spades, the death card, if that means anything to you, and took Hammett's bunk instead of his own. Hammett shrugged and moved up front. Hours later, the bus hit black ice, skidded, and flipped. Burton, asleep in the bunk he'd won, went straight through the window as the bus rolled, and it came down on top of him before anyone could reach him. He called the card right, he just didn't know what it was calling. Phil Lynott. Phil Lynott spent Christmas morning the way he'd spent everyone before it, surrounded by family. This was the one that didn't end that night. Through the 1970s, the Dublin-born frontman of Thin Lizzy had done something almost no one else on a hard rock stage had done before him. fronted a global act while black, Irish, and impossible to place inside any of the boxes the industry had ready for him. By the mid-1980s, the band was gone, his solo records weren't selling, and heroin, years in, past the point where anyone close to him could talk him out of it, had become the only constant left. He'd tried rehab, he'd tried isolation. Neither took. On the morning of December 25, 1985, in the middle of opening presents with his family, Lynott simply stopped responding, upright, eyes open, not answering when his mother said his name. She called an ambulance before anyone touched the paper still in his hands. At the hospital, doctors worked through what his body had absorbed over the years: liver, kidneys, heart, failing in that order, each one giving out because the one before it already had. He didn't wake up again in any way that mattered. He lasted 10 days on a machine, his mother beside him the entire time, before doctors told her there was nothing left to try. He died on January 4, 1986. He was 36, one of rock's first black frontmen, gone on a machine 10 days after the last Christmas morning his family ever spent with him whole. Dennis Wilson. Dennis Wilson threw things off his own boat for years. Then he went looking for them. As the drummer and de facto soul of the Beach Boys, Wilson spent 2 decades inside one of the most dominant acts in American music, while his own drinking quietly cost him almost everything else. By December 1983, at 39, he was living on a boat docked in Marina del Rey, most of what he'd owned already sold or gone. On December 28th, he went diving near the old dock where he used to moor a boat he no longer had, looking for things he'd thrown overboard years earlier during angrier, drunker nights. Photographs, mostly. Small things. He'd been drinking that day too, before he ever got in the water. He surfaced with something each time. Then one dive, he didn't surface at all. Divers found him under a neighboring yacht. He was the only Beach Boy who actually surfed, the one every song about waves and girls had been written around. And in the end, the ocean is what took him. Karen Carpenter. Karen Carpenter sang about being close to someone. She spent years growing distant from herself. As the voice behind the Carpenters' run of soft rock hits through the 1970s, Karen had a vocal instrument critics still call one of the finest in popular music, warm, precise, seemingly weightless on record. Behind the scenes, she battled anorexia for most of that decade, back when the illness barely had a name doctors agreed on, let alone a treatment plan. Her weight dropped to around 80 pounds at its lowest. She tried treatment once, in New York, gained some of it back under supervision, then lost it again within months of coming home. Her heart, worn down by years of starving herself, was failing quietly under a frame that looked, to almost everyone around her, like it was finally getting better. On February 4, 1983, at her parents' house in California, she collapsed. She was 32. Her death is one of the reasons anorexia entered public conversation as a real, treatable illness. A conversation that reached her only once it was already too late to matter. Marvin Gaye. Marvin Gaye asked for a fight to stop. Instead, it became fatal. By the early 1980s, Gaye had reshaped soul music twice, first with the political weight of what's going on, then with the sensuality of sexual healing, a comeback big enough to pull him back from the edge of bankruptcy. He was 44, back living in his parents' Los Angeles house after years of drug debt and tax trouble had emptied his own accounts. In the middle of a volatile stretch marked by cocaine and a father he'd never gotten along with. On April 1, 1984, one day before his 45th birthday, his parents were arguing over a lost insurance document. Marvin stepped between them, the way he reportedly had before. His father picked up a gun Marvin himself had given him for protection months earlier and shot him once in the chest. Marvin, still on his feet, told him he'd had it coming. His father shot him again. He died within the hour. He'd built a career on songs about people making peace with each other. He didn't live to see his next birthday, killed by the one person whose approval he'd spent his whole life trying to earn. Jaco Pastorius. Jaco Pastorius rewrote what a bass guitar could do. He died in a parking lot outside a club that wouldn't let him in. Through the late 1970s, Pastorius was called one of the most inventive bass players alive, reshaping jazz fusion with a fretless, melodic style other bassists studied like scripture. By 1987, undiagnosed bipolar disorder and years of substance use had taken nearly everything: his finances, his marriage, long stretches of actual homelessness. On September 11th, he showed up at a Florida club where Santana was playing and was turned away at the door, too disheveled, too erratic for the doorman to let through. An argument broke out. The club's head bouncer, a martial artist twice his size, beat him badly enough in the parking lot to fracture his skull. He never woke up from the coma that followed, dying 10 days later at 35. The man once called the greatest bass player alive spent his final months sleeping on beaches and sneaking into shows he used to headline. He didn't die on a stage. He died outside a door someone else decided he didn't get to walk through.